Churches are some of the wealthiest organizations in the world. They take in millions of dollars tax-free in order to help out their community. And while some small churches really do some communities good, there are other religious organizations with a dark and terrible past. It would seem that greed, power, and religion wouldn't mix, when, in fact, the Vatican is just the opposite. They are the biggest financial power on Earth. A lot of you might already know that the Catholic Church is the biggest corporation in the United States. It has a branch of office in every neighborhood. Their assets and real estate holdings exceed those of Standard Oil, AT&T, and US Steel combined. Its roster of dues-paying members is second only to the tax rolls of the United States government. A member of the New York Catholic Conference was quoted as saying that his church ranks only second to the United States government in total annual income. Wow. The financial position of the United States includes assets of at least $269.6 trillion and debts of $145.8 trillion to produce a net worth of at least $123.8 trillion. Trying to find this information on the church is nearly impossible. But there are some things we do know. The Catholic Church, once all its assets had been put together, is the most formidable stockbroker in the world. The Vatican's treasure of solid gold has been estimated by the United Nations World Magazine to amount to billions, along with the facts that the Catholic Church is the biggest financial power, wealth accumulator, and property owner in existence. It is a greater possessor of material riches larger than any other single institution, corporation, bank, giant trust, corporation, or state in the world. And the church owns the largest store of the world's most priceless art. The Pope, as the visible ruler of this immense amassment of wealth, is consequently the richest individual alive. The Vatican has large investments with the Rothschilds of Britain, France, and America, with the Hambros Bank, and with the Credit Suisse in London and Zurich. In the United States, it has large investments with JP Morgan, Chase Manhattan Bank, First National Bank of New York, Bankers Trust Company, and others. The Vatican has billions of shares in the most powerful international corporations, such as Gulf Oil, Shell, General Motors, Bethlehem Steel, General Electric, International Business Machines, or IBM, TWA, which I'm not sure what that one stands for, etc. The Vatican Bank manages $64 billion in assets on behalf of its 33,400 customers, according to a December 5, 2014 article in International Business Times. Or IBT? It owns $764 million in equity and keeps gold reserves worth over $20 million with the US Federal Reserve. According to a May 29, 2015 article in Reuters, for the fiscal year 2014, the Vatican Bank reported about $76 million in net profit, more than 20 times the $3.16 million reported for the previous year. So why don't they want you to know? Well, because if their people knew how much money they had, they'd be reluctant to give or donate to an organization that has so much wealth and power that it would make King Solomon blush. The Vatican Bank hid Nazi gold. According to a 1946 document from the Treasury Department, the Vatican may have both held and smuggled Nazi gold during World War II, despite being a neutral entity. The document, which was brought to the attention of the public in 1997, said the Vatican Bank held 200 million francs, which was worth about $254 million in 2016, for the Nazis. According to a rumor cited in the document, that money was later funneled through something called the Vatican Pipeline to Argentina and Spain, where it was given to Nazis who fled prosecution for war crimes. The Vatican Bank also apparently funneled money that was stolen from Serbs and the Jewish by the Ustaše, who were a Nazi puppet regime in Croatia. At the end of the war, the Utache started plundering from the victims of their ethnic cleansing campaigns and then smuggled 350 million Swiss francs, which is worth about 440 million US dollars, out of Yugoslavia through the Vatican. The money was then used to support the murderous Utache organization while they were in exile. Good work, the Vatican, if that's your real name. In 2000, a lawsuit was brought against the Vatican over this issue, but the suit ultimately failed. To this day, the Vatican's archives, which are likely the only source that could directly tie the Vatican Bank with Nazi gold, have remained sealed, and for good reason. But it wasn't the only gold that the Vatican helped the Nazis with. The Vatican also helped thousands of Nazi war criminals and collaborators escape after the Second World War. This is according to a book that puts together evidence from unpublished documents. The documents, which are discussed in author Steinacker's book Nazis on the Run: How Hitler's Henchmen Fled Justice, offer a significant insight into Vatican thinking, particularly because its own archives beyond 1939 are still closed. The Vatican has consistently refused to comment. The belief is that the Vatican's help was based on a hope for a revival of European Christianity, and the Church dreaded the Soviet Union. Through the Vatican Refugee Commission, war criminals were knowingly provided with false identities. The worst confessions. Catholic priests have some pretty awesome powers when it comes to granting absolution for committing crimes. This includes forgiving people for things like murder or mass murders and even genocide. That's right, if you're Catholic and you chop up the family next door and eat them, you can go to a priest, ask for forgiveness, and he could forgive you in the Word of God. Not only that, but the priest could never tell the police. Despite this, there are 5 sins that are so grave that priests can't absolve them. Instead, inside the Vatican, they have a secret tribunal called the Apostolic Penitentiary, which looks at cases involving these sins. This secretive tribunal has met off and on for the past 830 years, but in January of 2009, for the first time ever, its members held a press conference to discuss their work. 3 of the 5 sins that they contemplate can only be committed by the clergy. If you're a priest who breaks the seal of confession, a priest who offers confession to his own sexual partners, or a man who has directly participated in an abortion and wants to become a priest, then your case must go before the tribunal to receive absolution. The other 2 sins can be committed by anyone. The first, desecrating the Eucharist, is particularly bad because Catholics believe that the bread and wine transubstantiate into the body and blood of Christ. Messing with them is like messing with Jesus, which, no matter your thoughts on Christianity, seemed like a pretty cool dude. And then there's the sin of attempting to assassinate the Pope. Can't imagine they're gonna absolve that one. The meetings of the Apostolic Penitentiary are kept confidential because they're a different form of confession. The sinner is referred to by a pseudonym, and only the major penitentiary, Cardinal James Francis Stafford, decides how the sin shall be dealt with. Presumably, a bunch of Hail Marys doesn't cut it. Roman Catholic pedophiles. Ugh. Let's turn our attention to the Catholic Church and its role in human trafficking. Here's a bit of history for those that didn't take world history or religion classes or were instead passing notes during class. Roman imperialism was handed over to the Roman Catholic Church and merged terrestrial power with ecclesiastical power, earthly and heavenly power. Thus, the immoral debauchery that was the failing Roman Empire was handed over to a supposedly moral organization that was based upon teachings of love and compassion. What could go wrong? Just you wait. The failing Roman Empire co-opted the Christian Church in Rome due to the desire to have the renewed sources of youth and liveliness that the empire had been drained of through continuous war, and the Christians seemed to have in abundance. Love and compassion sounded a bit better than universal Roman dominance and slavery. The early church morals soon faded as terrestrial powers, through the 7 deadly sins, corrupted the ever-growing Christian empire. When Constantine declared Rome to be Christian and moved to the Eastern Roman Kingdom, he again ruled the known world with earthly and heavenly power. But Christian morality didn't get in the way of massacring thousands in the name of the new Roman Christian Empire, later known as the Holy Roman Empire. At different times in history, the Pope of the Roman Catholics was also the greatest warrior of his time. Sorry, ladies, we're getting there. The popes wearing armor and war attire was normal in the long history of the oldest corporation in the world. The continuation of Roman slavery became conversion to the Pope or death to every culture who got in the way of papal imperialism. War was just standard operating procedure for the Vatican. It wasn't until the deceit and espionage of the Jesuits took over the remnants of the Templar Knights, called the Knights of Malta, that the Catholic Church was able to effectively manipulate kings and nations without having to go to war itself. Kings became the pawns of Vatican espionage and Jesuit intrigue. The Jesuits infiltrated every monarchy of Europe by establishing court schools that trained the new monarchs in the way of the Jesuits. This still continues to this day with the 24 US Jesuit colleges and universities that train our politicians and elite. Since pedophilia and slavery were institutionalized in Rome, the Roman Catholic Church is well versed in these machinations. There have been centuries of child abuse and pedophilia in the Catholic Church, and as we know, an abused child is more likely to become a child abuser. Thus, the genesis of pedophilia in America and throughout the world is taught to children in Catholic schools. The dissonance of being taught morality while being treated immorally creates the split in the human soul that can allow the evil of child abuse and torture to exist in the soul of a child trained in a Catholic school or a parishioner in a Catholic church. Pope Francis has said that a child abuser is committing an act of, quote, black magic, unquote. Black magic rituals and human sacrifice often accompany the abuse of children. These rituals are, in fact, a defiling of the Catholic sacrament of Holy Eucharist, the ritualistic eating and drinking of the body and blood of Jesus. So, if you thought that the pedophilia problems were a new and recent thing, now you understand where and how they began. Catholicism and child sacrifice. The atrocity of close to 800 emaciated children's bodies buried in an Irish nun's septic tank represented the 44th child mass gravesite linked to the Catholic Church. You may have heard about this story as it came out in 2017, but it's not the only one, that's the thing. Catholic mass grave sites comprising of 350,800 missing children have been found in Ireland, Spain, Canada, and other countries. This is an organization that's supposed to help refugees and orphaned and abandoned children. In fact, Pope Francis was being prosecuted by the International Common Law Court of Justice in Brussels for allegedly trafficking 300,000 children of political prisoners through Vatican Catholic charities during Argentina's dirty war. According to witness testimony, some of those orphans ended up in a child mass gravesite in Spain. And recently, the aforementioned International Common Law Court of Justice prosecution was trying to figure out what happened to 50,000 missing Native Canadian children. There have been 32 child mass grave sites uncovered so far in Canada, most of them on Catholic-run Native residential school grounds. The Vatican, United Kingdom, and Canadian government have refused excavation of 32 Canadian mass grave sites believed to be filled with Native children. Before licensed archaeologists were turned away, human remains of children were uncovered at the larger sites in Brantford, Ontario, and Port Alberni, British Columbia, Canada. The 2013 award-winning film Philomena depicted the plight of 2,200 infants who survived Ireland's Catholic homes. The children were forcibly adopted or placed into child labor for these so-called adoptions, and insisted verifying documents were lost in a fire. Critics contended the Catholic Church had an ongoing reluctance to hand over internal records of Vatican Catholic charities out of fear further horrors could come to light. Such was the case in the Irish Magdalene laundries, where unwed mothers performed forced labor without compensation to 4 Catholic orders. After years of successful litigation on the case, victims still remain uncompensated. The ICLCJ court case in Brussels charging Pope Francis and other global elites for crimes against humanity was expected to extend for over a year. In 2016, ICLCJ court found 40 global elites guilty and ended with the unprecedented resignation of the former Pope Ratzinger. This all from a church so wealthy and powerful that if it had given each child that it violated or in some way lowered $1 million and a home of their own, they wouldn't even have noticed. Practice what you preach. Vatican banker death. One of the most enduring of recent conspiracy theories leveled toward the Vatican is with regard to the death of its then banker, Roberto Calvi. Also known at the time as God's banker, Calvi was found on June 12, 1982, hanging by a rope from some scaffolding located under Blackfriars Bridge in London. Curiously, he was discovered with bricks stuffed in his clothes and $15,000 made up of 3 different currencies. This bizarre murder shocked the world and raised many more questions than it answered. Many people pointed to the Illuminati and Freemasons as the perpetrators of the crime because of the bricks found in Calvi's pockets. This logic is flawed, however, due to one all-important fact. If this was an attack carried out by either of those shadowy groups, they would absolutely not have left a brick as a signature. The Freemasons, the actual group that the Illuminati is supposed to have grown out of, were adept workers of stone. If they were attempting to signal their involvement, then a carved stone would be much more apt than a brick, which holds 0 special significance with the Masons. This just serves to increase the mystery, unfortunately, and begs the question, if it wasn't the Illuminati, then who was it, and what's up with the brick? The answer to that question will perhaps never be known. It remains a complete mystery, although conspiracy theorists continue to search for any clues that they can. The only real leads in this cold case lead directly back to the Vatican. Many people forget just how powerful this elusive group of Catholic leaders really are. We have no doubt that if the Vatican wanted their banker out of the picture, then they would have no problem doing so. Given their penchant for theatrics, this seems right up their alley. Without any hard evidence, however, we'll probably never actually know the circumstances involving Calvi's death. What remains clear is that he was definitely into some shady stuff. No regular mugging, this murder was obviously carried out by a group that knew what they were doing and had no qualms about getting their hands dirty in the creepiest and cold-blooded way possible. Vatican treasury worth. We all know that the Vatican is incredibly wealthy. This city holds an estimated $10 to $15 billion, and that's just what we know about. After being so deeply involved in money lending and financing over the course of its history, it's no wonder that the Vatican has all that wealth. Anyone remember the practice of paying penances for less time spent in purgatory? Of course, nobody actually remembers. It happened a long time ago, but the important part is we all know that it happened and why. It's all based on Vatican greed. Thomas Luther used it as a basis for his 95 Thesis nailed to the door of All Saints Church in Wittenberg. This all took place back in 1517, but it is still personally relevant to millions of people today. That one important document helped form the Protestant Church and various other offshoots. People were tired of the lengths that this organization was going to in order to fleece them out of a buck, especially considering how loaded they already were. This isn't surprising at all. The Vatican never shied away from flashing its cash. The Pope's traditional red leather outdoor slippers have carried an amazing price tag over the years, and that just covers the basic papal footwear. Vatican City is no stranger to lavish decorations and wild parties that leave the rest of us wondering whether or not we're being taken for a ride. Far from the humble, sin-free lives they forced their followers into, the good times never really ended at the Vatican. Double standards make up the foundation of the Catholic Church, which makes it tough to believe that they actually care about their subjects at all. Vatican officials throughout the ages have seen the general population as targets for the ultimate con, squeezing as much money and productivity out of them while giving nothing in return except empty promises. Now, to be fair, funding those orgiastic parties that countless errant popes were so celebrated for would break the bank of most modern countries while also leaving them with historical hangovers. Vatican library contents. The Vatican's library is immeasurably immense. It would definitely be a tough job cataloging, curating, and maintaining their vast collection. This collection includes countless supremely rare and sought-after scripts, scrolls, and tomes. There is incredibly convincing evidence that the secrets contained within these writings could potentially discredit the entire Catholic Church and leave the Vatican penniless. This is due to the fact that it's expected that many omitted Gospels and Scriptures, painting a very different picture with regard to Catholic religious beginnings, are being stored there, safe from prying eyes. It's a well-known fact that Catholicism has cherry-picked only the narratives that best suit their ideals as well as their deep pockets. Even more intriguing is the Vatican's secret archives, an even more closely guarded secret that contains their most sensitive documents. We've been told that it contains all documentation relating to papal duties, but its name suggests that it probably contains much more. They're known to include transcripts from the trials of the Knights Templar and Galileo, as well as the blueprints for a special flying machine that probably never got off the ground. Many also claim that the lost Gospels and Scriptures that it holds would shed light on a very different history than the one portrayed in the Bible. These forgotten texts simply didn't fit their narrative at the time. Their position was one of absolute power, and they took any threat to their throne very seriously. In an attempt to maintain their infallibility and conceal any perceived mistakes in the doctrine of the day, Vatican officials quietly locked them away and conveniently omitted their contents in their sermons. To this day, nobody really knows the extent to which these documents would discredit the Catholic Church, but with a little imagination, one can foresee a lot of headaches for those currently involved in the cover-up if they were to be brought to light. Misbehaving Vatican officials. Church officials in the Vatican are supposed to uphold the ideals and beliefs of the Catholic Church. Their actions are supposed to guide those of their 1.6 billion followers worldwide. It seems someone forgot to give these guys the memo on good behavior. Either they dozed off when God laid down his ground rules, or they just didn't care much to begin with. No matter the reason, the big guy definitely dropped the ball when allowing the Vatican's upper crust to take control. So much for omnipotence, huh? Corruption is rife in its ranks, and its inhabitants have lived a life of extravagant luxury throughout its history, often to the detriment of others. Getting ahead generally means stepping on someone else's neck to get there, unfortunately. Stories abound that relate shady goings-on, and conspiracy theories are a dime a dozen. Sinister murders, hidden truths, and Vatican officials engaging in perverse acts are only the tip of the iceberg. Pope Leo X is known to have had children dressed up as mythical creatures baked into enormous pies and puddings, having them leap out upon presentation of the dessert to guests. If that isn't a sick sense of humor, we don't know what is. Furthermore, Leo, always in hot water, was also rumored to be gay, having flings with a number of men. We're not ones to judge, but considering Leo actively punished homosexuality throughout his empire, it seems like he held a lot of double standards. Little boys jumping out of pudding while dressed as Cupid also seems like it's a little too depraved of an activity for a pope to be indulging in. Then again, when you speak for God, you seemingly get to do whatever you want, and damn the rest of us. Plenty of burnings at the stake and witch hunts seem to suggest that the church may have gotten more than a few things wrong throughout their rule. Even Pope Francis recently denounced his officials by listing 15 ailments that plague the Vatican. Now, here's a pope we can get behind. Included in his indictment was the seeming spiritual Alzheimer's that officials displayed. Ouch. Let's also not forget the accounts of child molestation that are so prevalent in Vatican society. They gotta go too. Vatican-owned gay bathhouse. Our absolute favorite item on this list, it was discovered that the Vatican actually owns a property that houses an extremely decadent gay bathhouse. Given the church's stance on homosexuality, someone probably should have read through that contract before signing off on it. Then again, we couldn't be happier to hear that this slip-up was given the go-ahead. It must be said that Pope Francis really has done a bit of an about-turn on the stance he expects Catholics to take when it comes to this heated topic. Before we proceed, we do think he should be commended for his attempts to embrace everyone. It still doesn't take away from hundreds of years of single-minded persecution propagated by his fellows. The church is still rife with homophobia and in opposition to positive change, with a lot of Francis's colleagues and fellows still in outright opposition of gay rights. That's what makes their ownership, in a sense, of a gay bathhouse so comical, of course. Yes, you heard that right. The Vatican owns a gay bathhouse. In 2013, they scooped up a $30 million share of the property in order to establish apartments for officials. Located in Rome, the 20 or so lavishly appointed apartments, one of which contains 12 rooms, are a stone's throw away from the Europe Multi Club. Making the situation even more hilarious is the fact that they've added a religious slant to their nightly party themes. Bruno, the overweight pastor of souls, is always a sensation, dressed in Catholic vestments to complete the ensemble. Even more amusing, the church also owns a German publisher that has put forth titles like Lawyer's Whore. Racy stuff for a church-led company, don't you think? Whatever your take on it, we think the Vatican playing landlord to one of Europe's hottest gay bathhouses is one of the more ironic uses of their insane wealth.